and I want to introduce Markus Grillitsch, economic geographer at Lund University. Markus studies regional development and economic transformation, essentially trying to understand why some regions reinvent themselves while others struggle. Pretty right? Yeah, yeah, thank you. And Adel Daoud, computational social scientist at Linköping University. He works with big data and AI to study poverty and inequality, and has been exploring how unconventional data sources can reveal hidden social patterns. Sums it up, or?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Very good. So we're on the right track. And finally, Kim Nilvall from the Swedish Police Force. Kim works with strategic analysis and intelligence, where timely and reliable information can make a real difference for public safety. Yeah? Yep. Perfect. Then we're on the right track. Perfect. So we have a short panel before we get more into SESAC. And let's see, I'm going to remove that and have a seat. So we're going to talk about risk science, economic geography, development and data science, and law enforcement. But let's see. So satellite data has transformed fields like meteorology and environmental science. If we look at social science and policy, where do you see the biggest untapped opportunity for satellite-enabled analytics?
So, I mean, there are many ways. The main field that I'm working in is what Ola mentioned previously, is in data scarce areas, right? So there you have to think about alternative ways of measuring different trajectories of development, inequality, interventions of different sorts. So I would say that is an area where I'm hoping, through SESAC and collaborations here, SIDA and Swedish Space Agency and beyond, is that we can build an infrastructure enabling policymakers to use the data that we are creating. For example, to understand where, if the Swedish Aid Agency helps to build a road or a school or a hospital, we'll be able to use those metrics that we have created through satellite images to see the long-term developments. Did this road make any difference for development, right? With existing data, that's impossible because surveys are so scarce and very expensive. The US has cut down funding for US aid, which is one of the premier sources to understand what's happening on the ground. So to sum up, basically that's what I would see the kind of creating infrastructure to use synthetic data, but also methods that we are creating for decision making.
So you see a big opportunity for this?
Yes, absolutely. Otherwise, I would be somewhere else today.
Kim, how from the police perspective?
Well, yeah, I can just fill in there, because all the things that he talked about is how society change and urban development and how land use somehow forms and shapes where people walk, talk, and routine activities. And from our perspective, when we work with crime prevention, for instance, the routine activity is like the foundation. Meaning more or less, that for a crime to happen, there has to be a motivated offender, a suitable object, and also a place, and in absence of a capable guardian. So every time when we are changing the landscape and we are changing cities, we also change people's routine activities, which means also that crime will shift patterns, so to say. And also, we think a lot about this change toward 15-minute cities. They want to somehow make sure that people have their basic needs within 15 minutes. How that will shape crime and routine activities, we don't know. But I think that information that we talk about now could somehow fill in the gap, because what we do now is look back at data and try to explore the future. And I think the closer we are measuring, the better it gets.
And you're of course talking about also crime prevention then.
Yes.
And how would you see, and how would you do that today with the data that you have available?
Well, more from a historic perspective, where we use crime data more or less and put it into geography, context, and different kind of urban areas and landscapes to see how it changed and follow people. That's what we do, and try to find hot spots or hot events or hot times, hot hours, to target our resources to the concentrations of crime. And when routine activities changes, you can also see that the concentration of crime changes across space and time.
Routine activities. I'm just trying to learn something. Markus,
Yeah.
what would you say?
Well, I come from a context where it's a lot of data. So the opposite of Adel. So register data about all the individuals, income, education, your IQ when you went to the military service and everything. Then of course the question is, what do we do with satellite data? And we have been quite occupied with using all this data, and we miss some other important data, like physical infrastructure. You could think that physical infrastructure affects regional development, economic development, and so on, or the environment. So I could think that with satellite data, we could connect the data that we have with other important dimensions, which we sometimes have missed out, like physical infrastructure, everything that you see, basically, the environment. So I think this is one thing. And the other thing is, I think about Europe without borders, in a time when there are a lot of borders, right?
Yeah.
So working with regional development and economic geography, you look at cohesion reports of the European Commission. There you see many boundaries, which are the regions. And then it happens that, for instance, northern Sweden is peri-urban.
Sorry?
It's kind of in between urban and periphery, the northern part of Sweden in these maps. But of course, as you go there, then you maybe don't see a lot of urban space sometimes. And this happens because you have the borders, right? And if you integrate more spatial analytics and satellite pictures, maybe you can have a couple of these maps in these reports that are without borders, for instance. So there I think there are quite a lot of opportunities to complement different data sources, basically.
So, Trevor, from your perspective, have you had a thought about this as well?
Yes, I was thinking actually in terms of one of the reports that we did when I was at Lloyd's called Food System Shock.
Food System Shock.
Food System Shock, and it was a group of American and UK academics got together, and we kind of funded this. And the idea was to come up with a scenario, and they came across the idea of a major El Nino that would cause weather events and effects all around the world, and also because of the heating it produced, you got disease vectors from crops kind of moving further north and further south. So you had flooding, you had droughts, you had disease. And what that did was it led to the staple foods, all of the staple foods in the world, so sort of rice, maize, soy, wheat, all having yield drops. And what was really amazing to me was that a 10% drop in the yield led to a 500% increase in the price of traded food, because a lot of food is kept within the country, but the traded is quite thin. And that seemed to us that it could lead to migrations, it could lead to rioting, it could lead to all sorts of factors. So I think, with Earth observation satellites, you could sort of track all of these things happening, and then you could do things like actually monitor the migrations of people, you could monitor the informal settlements that they're living in, the conditions they're living in, the size of any protests. So the sort of that's why I quite like scenarios, because you could almost think through the use of satellites in multiple different ways. You're tracking the physical events, you're tracking the social reaction to those events, and also the infrastructure that you were talking about. You could look at road network shocks and see what's happening there. In this scenario, actually, the Mississippi floods, and it turns out that America transports a lot of things on the Mississippi, so I'm told, and it was suddenly unavailable for transport. So you start to see supply chain effects and all of that. So it would be interesting maybe to sort of have a baseline scenario here, and then think about all the uses of satellites. That's my thinking.
Kim, from your perspective, what are the most urgent societal or policy problems where better data could change decisions, maybe?
From the policing perspective, I think it's, of course, filling in the gaps that we have today. Because, as I said previously, we talk about routine activities. That's about mobility and how people move around across time and space. For us to produce those predictions, we are dependent on companies that has that as an added value. Telecompanies, for instance, we can get data to see mobility from there, but it's history. We can see it in transportation systems, how people go to work and flip their cars. So we can do modelings with that, but it's always based on data which is a history. To move forward, and we can measure closer, will of course strengthen our prediction, and also maybe going from strategic thinking to more operational and tactical. Meaning, if we can see it closer and in time,
More in real time.
In real time, that would of course help us out to prevent certain events that can happen. And in particular now, when mobile phone and internet and people are so connected, people can start turning in different direction to certain events very, very fast. For instance, we had an incident in Stockholm when it was Valborg, where suddenly 4,000 youngsters is in one area and there's 3 or 4 adults.
Valborg.
Valborg, yeah.
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Valborg.
I'm just curious what kind of event it was.
Valborg.
Yeah.
And suddenly there were 4,000 kids there with 4 parents who were supposed to have a little nice party. But that's because of the chain reactance on social media.
I'm sure.
It wasn't a house, it was actually an area.
Okay.
But I think that those movements start early. And if you would be able to spot certain changes or deviations from normal patterns, of course, we can be more prepared and take care of public safety.
It lines with what Trevor said about food, but yes.
Yeah, just adding to that, I mean, I think what you're saying with the mobile phone data, that you essentially need additional data sources to enable, the satellite data itself, right? So it's kind of a multimodal approach where you need, I mean, this is the thing, that satellite images, I mean, imagine watching a movie and you only see, I don't know, every 1,000 frame of a movie, right? You kind of hard to patch things together if you don't have maybe textual data to describe what is happening, the context. So I think we definitely need to combine it to get it at this resolution of temporality, but also the sources of actually what is going on there. So yeah, more data of different sorts as well. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Markus?
Yeah, I find sometimes policymakers develop a need when you develop some new knowledge. So what I mean is that the data that you provide also guides them in their decision making. And what happens then is that, for instance, people that work with economic development, innovation, sit in one department, and there's another department that works with risks, for instance, and they don't communicate. And so if we would integrate this data, for instance, and create something that shows how the industry is interacting with the environment, for instance, and that an indicator is then something that combines these two in relation to each other. And suddenly, if you had this map, for instance, then suddenly it could be something policymakers could work towards. For instance, collaborating in between to addressing these things. So I think with SESAC, if we're a bit experimental and if we develop some of these maps that kind of combine the big challenges, maybe competitiveness and sustainability, decarbonization, whatever, different kind of challenges, but that kind of smartly integrated in new maps, then suddenly there is something else policymakers can work towards, have different goals that they can develop. So this is, I think,
more proactive then.
Yeah, and you can be proactive, you can measure, you can monitor, you can say, okay, now we do some interventions, how does this change, and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot in this experimental part and creating new maps that don't exist yet by combining different data. I think that is what I would be looking forward to.
And Trevor, have you had a thought about this as well, or?
Well, I definitely think more data is good. I come from a sort of math statistic background, so therefore data is joy. But I think also models, so not just providing data, but also providing models. You can, if you can get your partners to understand how the model works, they become a shared communication tool. We found that certainly in the insurance industry, these catastrophe models that got built, which took hazard and exposure data, which you could also track with satellites, and vulnerability, which is working with the engineers, and you bring it all together, and then you say, this is how much risk we see in this location, this property. And you found by having a model that the brokers use, the insurers, and also the clients, you could much better talk about risk using the same terms and understanding what you were saying. Because I do find otherwise, if you get different groups, they have different meanings for things. They'll almost, one person might think data means this, another person might think it means that. But bring it together in a model, and then everyone has a shared view.
So integrated data sounds like a common theme. So Trevor, you talk about something called, and you often speak about taxonomy of risk. What do you mean about that?
The dictionary definition is a classification of something, but for us it's basically when we do a wide literature review around a topic, also coupled with expert interviews, and then we kind of boil down the key risks under these headings that I mentioned, the financial, geopolitical, etc. And then we try and publish a paper. So we've got the infographic, which has got the taxonomy in the columns and all the risks underneath, and then we describe them. And then finally, we use them as a sort of way of a prelude to modeling. So if we can understand the space through a taxonomy, then we can then build a better model. We can decide what to leave out, which is always a key thing in modeling. You can't model everything.
I saw a slide of it earlier.
Yeah, that's right. That's the taxonomy as a slide, and then this is what we do with it. So we actually have quite simple models often, and the taxonomy really helps you decide what the key features are to include in them. So that's what I meant by it.
So, Markus, you study regional development and economic transformation. How could satellite data help us better understand how economies actually change on the ground? For example, industrial activity, land use, or urban transformation?
Yeah, regional development or economic development has always been quite narrow. You know, the goal was to create new income, new jobs, and things like that. And now there is a call for and demand to have a bit broader perspective. So it's maybe job, income, but maybe also decarbonize. So, and then, for instance, the work that we did with Ola and Alexandros was, okay, measure with satellite pictures local CO2 levels. So you could kind of, using different types of data, you could measure different dimensions of development or sustainability and bring them together, maybe develop new indexes or so. Or another topic is, okay, fine, to have good new jobs, but at the end of the day, it's about maybe people's well-being, people's opportunities to do different kind of things, and then it would enable you also to cover different dimensions of it. So access to green space will contribute to well-being, as well as having different job opportunities, right? So you could cover a bit broader perspective of what does it mean to regional development or local development, place-based development, and things like that.
Adel, your research often combines big data and social science to understand poverty and inequality. What new insights about inequality might become possible when satellite data is combined with other data sets?
Right. I mean, the way to unpack that question is that I tend to kind of describe what we're doing in my lab, the AI and Global Development Lab, is we take the work that Hans Rosling led. He passed away a couple of years ago, and we kind of do that on steroids. So he focuses on the country level. He tries to unpack at the regional level. But really what you can do with satellite images, as you were describing, Markus, is you can get these very high resolution estimates of neighborhood level development, right? So you can basically see at this square, you can figure out how things moving since the past couple of decades and onwards. So I would say that's one thing, that you get high resolution. You can then intervene in terms of public policy much more precisely. But it turns out that this data product is just the outcome. It's basically what we would call Y in statistics, right? And X is basically all the covariates you need, the other data that you need to explain why you're seeing these outcomes, right? So you need to collect, various other data sources, as you were saying, Trevor. You look at roads, you look at housing, you look at a lot of other things. You look at war and destruction, as we've been engaged in. So it's like, how do we then figure out a causal model? That's kind of the next step, to try to intervene. Like, okay, what would have happened if we changed the level of conflict to this level? Or to that level, or natural disasters, we took that away, or we build more schools. What would happen with these Y outcomes? So creating and curating the data, the satellite image data, is just the first step. Really, what you want is to figure out also statistical principles of what do you do with this data that you have created, that is also machine driven oftentimes. It's an AI model that has been fed with these satellite images, and it comes with its own uncertainty. Maybe it wasn't the best model that you used, right? It wasn't the biggest machines that you used to create the data. So then it comes with some uncertainty, it comes with some bias. So what we are figuring out is to think about ways for decision making and policy making. How do you create a statistical infrastructure that enables you to think in multi-steps, right? You're doing the curation of satellite images, the processing of the data, and the causal inference. So all of that requires a lot of kind of new statistical tools. So we have a book that we're writing with colleagues at the Department of Statistics at Harvard that is called The Trinity of Statistical Learning. It's basically the trinity. Of statistical learning. It's basically saying that there are three different dimensions that all data science work needs to think about. It's basically resolution. You have high resolution images and low resolution images. How does that affect your outcome? You have multi-sources. Not only are you using satellite images, you're using something else. That's another dimension. The multi-phase, you have many phases in the research, right? You process, you run machines, and so on. So how do you then think about learning, decision-making, encapsulating all of those dimensions? That's kind of the new statistical theory frontier that we need to push on. And so me and others in the field are trying to take the lead, and SESAC will be one infrastructure for that and for disseminating.
Kim, from a policing perspective, situational awareness is crucial. Are there areas where satellite data could realistically support public safety, crisis response, or crime prevention? As you mentioned, Valborg.
Yeah. For instance, And also I would like to add to this, everything that you talked about will have an outcome on crime.
Exactly.
Because of all these things. But
in a positive or a negative way?
Well, if we do it together, it can be very positive, because then we can predict, what to do. But first of all, I would just say that when you work within the police, we are very limited in doing analysis in terms of methodology and access to tools, and we are very dependent on ourselves. And then we have, luckily, some great cooperations with Lund University and Malmö University, so we are advancing our knowledge all the time. But Sweden is a very long country where we tend to somehow look where we stand in the cities, and we do not explore that much what's going on outside the cities. What we also know is there is a big change now up in the north, where there's a lot of industry that is developed and brings a lot of people together, and new housing areas. We also have a situation where there's a change of security very close to us in different countries, which of course affects the question of critical infrastructures, which is one part of public safety that we will be respondent for when we talk about civil response. And I think what satellite can bring into this is, of course, starting to look with a little bit of new eyes on the areas where we not normally look, and that is beyond the cities and out in more rural areas, because we have a lot of infrastructure out there that we will be very dependent on. So when we talk about mobility, then we can talk about the ongoing routine activities that people engage in daily basis. But deviations from that is interesting for us. But also we can talk about covert routine activities that don't want to be exposed, but somehow you might see better if you put more data together and see small changes in areas which we are very interested to know what's going on in those areas. So when we look at situational awareness, we have to look in different contexts. We are normally looking in cities. We should look a little bit outside, and also add in those questions that is about critical infrastructures, but also what's going on.
Are there any ethical perspectives that you've had a thought about? We're looking at this, and I'm not looking at being a criminal, but
no, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's very important to have this question, because that has to do with the legitimacy of policing. So what I'm talking about here is big movements, not individuals. It's flows of people. And when we talk about covered flows, those most likely we would like to detect no matter what, because then we can see the sensor that can detect a threat to critical infrastructure.
So, if we meet up in 5 years, what would success look like for satellite-enabled social science? What would you hope has changed in research, policy, or society as a whole? Markus, you want to start?
Yeah, we can start. So the European Union has this flagship product, Cohesion Report, every 2 years about how the region's doing in Europe, comparing them. There are many maps, but no satellite pictures. If in a couple of years there are a couple of satellite pictures in there, then I think it would have been a success.
All right. Very good.
Yes.
Trevor?
Yep. I think the creation of a community of people with SESAC at the center of it, so people in businesses that are consuming the outputs, eagerly awaiting the next one. So for me, obviously, the development of tools and all the research stuff will be exciting, and I'm sure almost inevitable because some great people working on it. But it's the connections and the making it useful bit that is the key to me.
Kim?
Well, hopefully we don't have a Valborg problem again. No, but I think, firstly, I mean, you talked about bringing people together, the boundary object, and I think when we talk about geography and satellites, possibilities of looking at Sweden with satellites, I think that's a very interesting object for the police to connect to, and also work together with academia to somehow put more data together and learn how to model, because I mean we are not academia within the police, we are very much practitioners. But when we are connecting with academia, we can do great things together. So I think that is an interesting part to satellite and the data we can get with that is like a boundary object that we can also get closer to academia with. Yes.
Adel, with the last words of this panel.
Yeah, of course. So besides welcoming that collaboration and building Ola's bird that we are very much looking forward to, for me the foundation is to think about planetary social science, planetary public policy, meaning that everything happens somewhere in space and time, and many of the social science, including my training in sociology, is like space is abstracted away, like things happen, but where are they happening, right? So it's basically if there's a map, then people have thought about there's actually action taking place somewhere on the planet. So moving towards a planetary consciousness, I would say, right, and kind of a thinking about humanity being on this planet, and that's a precious place to be, both in terms of environment and that we don't have any other place to be at. So I think with that kind of sets a vision, and hopefully we can, in Sweden, just take the lead on that.
Thank you so much. Give them a warm hand. Thank you so much. Thank you.